Hey guys, welcome to another LeetCode tutorial video. In this video, we're going to be covering LeetCode number 6, Zigzag Conversion. So this is a medium LeetCode, and as always, we're going to be going through the entire process from start to finish. So we're going to be reading the question, breaking it down, actually kind of using logic to determine how we're going to solve this. Then we're going to do some whiteboarding to determine our approach, and then finish it off with writing some actual code. So I really hope this video is helpful. Before we get into that, let me just say, if you are serious about getting good at these kind of data structures and algorithm questions, so you have an interview coming up that you really want to ace or whatever it is, I would highly recommend checking out the link in the description. Top of the description, if you're serious about this kind of stuff, it's going to take you to the next level when it comes to data structures, algorithms, LeetCodes, and just basically make you ace every interview if you put that work in. So let's get into this question. So zigzag conversion, we have the string PayPal is hiring is written in a zigzag pattern on a given number of rows like this. And so we have it here, and as you can see, we have PayPal is hiring. And so it's a little bit of a weird zigzag pattern. And then so we read it out line by line. So we have this top line, so pan, and then A to G, which is here, and then YIR. And so this is for 3 rows, as you can tell. So we've done it in 3 rows. But as you can see from here, write the code that it will take a string and make this conversion given a number of rows. That the number of rows is variable. So realistically, we could just have 1 row and it would just be PayPal is hiring. We could also have, say, as many rows as there are letters in this, which means it would just be 1 column. So there's a lot of variability within this. So there's a lot to kind of consider. So we take a look at the examples. We have the one that we were given just before. PayPal is hiring for 3 rows, and it outputs as we expected, like so. And so example 2, input. So the string is the same, and this time we have 4 rows. So this is going to be a completely different output. So we have PayPal is hiring, and obviously it goes down to 4 rows. And I think it's important to notice that they do look slightly different when you have 4 rows compared to 3 rows. Like here, we just had a single letter in between these kind of columns, whereas here now we have 2 letters, and this is going to increase, as we increase the number of rows. So for our third example, we just have a single letter with 1 row, and obviously it's just going to be outputting that exact string. So for our constraints, we can have a length of string of 1 to 1,000. So as you can see, we had 1 here. And then it's just going to have English letters and characters like that. And then we can have 1 row as our minimum. So those are some constraints to consider for our base cases. So let's get into doing some whiteboarding. So we have the example that we were given, that PayPal is hiring for 3 rows. So this is exactly as we have here. And so I personally find this a little bit misleading, and it's important to kind of consider this if you approached this question in an interview. If you were given this question, is that the way they give it to you might not be the easiest or most obvious, and it's intentionally a challenge. So they might give it to you in a way that's a little bit confusing, which is, in my opinion, what they've done here. So this is kind of misleading because it makes you think that they're almost like these columns going through, like I mentioned before about the columns and these rows. It doesn't really look like a zigzag pattern. Like, you can see how they've reached it by doing this zigzag, but it kind of misleads you and can sometimes make people think that they have to, I don't know, treat it like these columns, as we've seen in every example before. However, I'm just gonna show you a different way of showing that exact same data. So we have PayPal is hiring in a zigzag pattern, and as you can see, it's the exact same with the pan and the A to G and the YIR. It's the exact same, but this time it's a bit clearer how we're reaching that zigzag pattern. And so in this way, this is a bit easier to consider how we're going to code it. So we can literally just build it as they have it here. So we can build the zigzag using data structures and using an algorithm. So we're just going to create it so it goes through every letter, kind of builds that zigzag pattern, and then we just output whatever is necessary. So how are we going to do this? Basically, we're going to have a for loop that's going to go through every single letter in the string. So we're going to go through them all. And then we're also going to have a list which contains the rows. So we're going to be keeping track of what the rows are. And so for this one, we're going to have 3 rows. And so if you kind of think about it, we'll go through the first letter, we'll add it to row 1. We'll go through the second letter, add it to row 2. Go through the third letter, add it to row 3. Then row 2, row 1, row 2, row 3, and we'll just keep doing this. And so the way we're going to kind of handle, oopsie daisy, the way we're going to handle these kind of edge cases. So how are we going to handle the direction, I guess, is the most important question here, because you can do the for loop easy. Everyone can do that. You can create the list of all the rows quite easily. That's something that everyone can do. But how are we going to handle the direction? So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of handle it based on these boundaries here. So obviously there's boundaries here, and it's dependent on the number of rows. So this boundary, if you think about it, means that we have the row is equal to 0. So row equals 0. And this boundary, the row equals number of rows, which we are given as num rows, take 1. So we're going to have sort of an increment variable. And if we're going this way, we're increasing the rows. So the increment is going to be 1. And then as soon as we hit a boundary, if we hit this boundary, the increment goes to -1. So then we can start going backwards. And then we hit this boundary, increment goes to 1. Hit this boundary, increment goes to -1. And that's how we're going to have this zigzag pattern, is we're just going to base it off of these boundaries, and then we're going to add it to our list of rows, so that we can kind of keep track of row 1, row 2, row 3. And then eventually, once we've gone through all the letters, it's simply a matter of concatenating row 1. So it's going to be row 1 plus row 2 plus row 3. And that's going to output whatever we wanted. So yeah, that's really the entire process for solving this question. It's a lot simpler when you, or at least in my opinion, when you go from this, which is a little bit complex, a little bit confusing, a little bit like, how did they get this representation? And then we bring it over here and we say, oh, it's literally, we can literally just go through every single letter and add it to a row and then combine them all. So it's a lot simpler, in my opinion, than it's made out to be. So now let's actually write some code. So I think the first thing we need to consider is the base case. So the most important base case, in my opinion, for this is the one that it's just one row. So in that case, if we have a base case where we've got a single row, then it's just going to output the string that we've given. So if num rows is equal to 1, then we're just going to return s. Because if you think about it, if we had one row here, it would just be PayPal is hiring along one row. So now that we've handled that base case, we need to create our list of rows. So this is how we're going to be keeping track of all the strings for the rows, so we can keep adding new letters to the relevant rows. But we need to initialize them first. So the way I'm going to do that is we've got a list which contains one string here, and then we're going to multiply that by the number of rows. So if we had 2, if the number of rows was 2, this would just create a list with 2 empty strings, which is exactly what we want. And now we need to actually handle the zigzagging. So we're going to add all of the letters in a zigzag. So we'll need to initialize the current row. So current row equals 0. Then we need to have that increment value. This is the one we're talking about. So if we're starting here, obviously we want it to be starting as 1. So we're going to set increment equal to 1. And then now we need to actually go through every single letter in the string. So for letter in S, the first thing we're going to do is actually add it to the relevant row. So rows, current row, and add that letter. So this is just going to go through and add the letter to the corresponding row. And then now we need to change that direction if we fit that boundary. So we've added it to the relevant row. Now it's a matter of checking these two boundaries here. So if current row is equal to num rows take 1. So this means it's at this boundary here. Then increment equals -1 because now we want to go backwards. Else elif, then current row equals 0. So this means we've hit this boundary here, which means we were going backwards, and now we want to set increment to 1 to go forwards again. So increment equals 1. And then we just update the row count based on the increment by adding that increment. And finally, we just need to combine the strings again, or all the rows rather. So this can be done in Python quite easily with a little one-liner here, with a empty string dot join and then rows. Now I've done some things to for syntax purposes, for example, just to make it easier to write. So this is one such thing. So yeah, this is just going to combine the rows and concatenate all of the strings. And this, as I mentioned before, just creates a list of empty strings for the number of rows we have. So if I submit this, as you can see, it was successful. Top 99.16% in runtime and top 96.15% in memory. So, really great algorithm, really efficient. But yeah, thanks so much for watching. I really hope this was helpful. If it was, it would be much appreciated if you would like and subscribe the video. It would mean a lot to me. So thanks so much for watching. Have a good one.